guess we can start. So thanks for coming here after lunch. I'm going to be fighting the postprandial kind of coma, but that's fine. Anyways, we're going to talk about rapid, intelligent application development. My name is Dyar. I'm relatively new to InterSystems. I started in February, and my general role is in AI and machine learning, looking at the product from that perspective and helping customers figure out what they need to do in this area and figuring out how to get features into our product to enable that. And one thing basically we'll be talking about here is just what are intelligent applications to begin with. So really the idea is that intelligent applications should use AI in some way, but they really need to be using it in a way that makes it better, that's innovative, that makes the application more personalized, more effective. And that's a very broad definition, but definitely has artificial intelligence as the core. And, you know, as my mom would say, it's everything that a computer can do, but that the human beings will never be able to do. And we're seeing, though, that that's actually getting kind of blown away. Of course, that was a long time ago, and even more things are being done that we didn't think computers could do, as well as humans, and actually they're doing it better. So we're going to look at an example first of someone that is using an intelligent application, that had an intelligent application developed for her. And that'll kind of point to ways that you should be thinking about building them. So first off, I want to ask people, who's a developer here? Okay, and who's developing using machine learning? Okay, so at least some. Who wants to do that at some point and has some requirements to use some machine learning? Okay, so good. Lots of people there. So anyways, we'll talk about Monique. So as you can see, Monique is a young woman, and the story comes from actually Belgium. Full disclosure, was seen by my colleague, Benjamin Debeau, who's based in Belgium, on their television, and it was a public television show, and highlighted Monique. But you can see she gives presentations. She's, what you can't tell from the picture, though, is she's blind. She was born with congenital glaucoma, and it's very hard for her to do a lot of things in life, but she's overcome them. She uses you can see, let's see, a device hooked up to her laptop that uses Braille, and she just doesn't let her condition stop her at all. Another interesting thing about her is that she has a horse named Dinky, and it's the first guide horse in Europe. And so she's a special individual, for sure. So she is, of course, an amazing individual for all the things that she's overcome, but she has a passion for taking photographs. Now, being a blind person, you could think that would be quite difficult, and it is difficult. So one of the things that makes it difficult, or things that is difficult about taking pictures, is that it's hard to get the light balance right. It's hard to get the thing that you're trying to take a picture of right in the center of the picture if you're blind. You may know a general area where she wants to take a picture, but she could use some help. So they actually developed an application for her based in this program that they ran. And it was an application that would be resident on her phone that would help her take pictures. So another kind of aspect of intelligence, of course, is the ultimate and the original intelligent system is the brain. And before we talk about the application that they developed for Monique, I want to look at the brain for inspiration as to how intelligent systems can be developed, should be developed, and how that might relate to how you architect things. And in another bit of full disclosure, I did a fair amount of grad work in neuroscience, and cognitive neuroscience in particular. And so it's a passion of mine, and I find a lot of relationships between, how the brain works and how you need to make intelligent applications. And when you're talking about the brain, typically you're talking about the cortex. there's a lot of different areas. In fact, there's over 50 some identified areas that you have in the back of the brain, the visual cortex. You have in the front of the brain, more on the top, the motor areas. You have the prefrontal cortex, which handles a lot of the planning and execution. And you have auditory cortex. All of those areas are connected to each other to some extent, but there's no real central coordinator. And an intelligent application has to do something. And it has to take all of those processing, the high-level processing that happens in those areas, and turn it into some kind of decision or action, right? And since there's no cortical area that puts everything together, even though you have some thinking and language areas that seem to be tracking your conscious state, there are structures underneath subcortically. And the one we'll talk about in particular, the basal ganglia, that takes input from all of those areas and has a role in coordinating all of that information and getting it out into an action. So for example, it was first really found to be critical in eye movements. So there you have some kind of a visual stimulus, and you have to move your eye to that place in the visual field. So you're combining that sensory information, the visual information, with a motor action. And so there, the basal ganglia takes those different bits of information and turns it into an action. It's also very much involved in motivation and reinforcement learning. So not only does it get all this connection from the cortex, the basal ganglia also has parts that are connected to reward centers. So it's also very involved in addiction, some parts of it, because addictive drugs learn to hijack this circuit and make these things feel good. Even when they don't really feel good, you still get a motor program that drives you to addiction based on that hijacking of the circuitry. And it's also very involved in selecting what types of information you're keeping in your brain at any one time. So as I talked about, you had the prefrontal cortex doing planning and having some executive control from there. And it's also doing a lot of the integrating between the different types of information. But you have to take information in and out of your brain, your working memory at any one time. If you're doing a long calculation, like a math calculation, you sometimes have to remember something for later. That's a kind of memory called prospective memory, so that later on in the task, you remember that you were supposed to remember that thing and pull it back into your working memory. Basal ganglia helps learn sequences of information processing. So it has a role in all sorts of cognitive and non-cognitive kind of activity. And so it's a critical coordination and orchestration center. Okay, so, and here's a very pretty picture. So this one I really like. And you take all of these different parts of the cortex, then these lines, all these lines are connections going down into the basal ganglia, which you see here. When you just look at those parts of the brain, you see that they are rainbow colored. They're getting information, they're getting input from all those different areas of the brain. So what does this have to do with, building applications? Well, just keep it in mind as one solution for how brains have been built, is that they have very high level processing in the cortex, very high resolution, and then you have a lower resolution coordination layer that basically doesn't know everything about all of those areas, but it knows enough to coordinate them. And that's how you need to build kind of intelligent systems. All right, so let's go into the functional requirements of this application for Monique, and we'll think about how this is all put together in the context of what I've told you already. So one thing that you can do is you need a tilt check, right? Because they were talking about how it's hard to get the picture in view. And so that is something that we want to have in this application. Lighting. So if you want to figure out the lighting balance, and make sure that you have a good color balance, that's something that you could do probably from the camera. And then to make it really intelligent, you are going to be getting some object recognition. So what would really make this app cool, and I forgot to mention this, is that if everything she took as a picture, all of that, the objects were recognized and then put into text, into kind of a searchable database for her to search for things that she's done. And then on top of that, if you could do face recognition and detect, a particular person, someone you knew, you'd like to know that within your application. So you have functional requirements. Now, you probably are not going to build all of that yourself, right? That's one of the keys, is that you're going to outsource. You're going to get some services, and you're going to put them together in your application. And there's a lot of options. Just like in Serial, you go out, you see there's a lot of different cognitive services, different vision, different speech recognition. You have to choose which one. And then all of the API economy, there's just a million services. And you have to decide how you're going to do that. And, of course, it's easy enough to think about a small application. This application is relatively modest, right? And it's easy enough to think about how you might put one or two of these services together in an app and have a simple kind of workflow. But once the number of services gets pretty large, even 2 or 3, then you start to have a lot of issues with coordination. And you're going to be doing a lot of kind of negative engineering. You need to figure out what services you're waiting on, what services you're going to fire off right away, what to do in different error situations. It gets to be very complicated very quickly. So looking at how we're going to get each of these functional requirements satisfied, for the tilt check, you can look at, there's an SDK for the phone that tells you what orientation it's at, and you can code something up. The same thing goes for the lighting analysis. You just look at a couple pixels, and you can get some estimate of the color balance or the light balance. But now you're going to go into the cloud realm when you go into object recognition. And that's going to take some time to call out, and you're going to have to choose which one. The one that they chose for this application actually had a way that you could fine-tune it and give it your own images, not only for object recognition, but for face recognition. You could train the model and make it better for the people that you knew or that you had in your contact list, as well as particular images like of Dinky the horse she wanted to be able to detect. And in general, you're going to not build these things all yourself. You really want to use these services, because in this case, this application was developed by one person part-time over just like a weekend or so. So it's very easy to do these kind of things if you use them. Now, that's one use case. It gives you an idea. Another one we're going to talk about now is an application that's more in an enterprise kind of space. Something you guys are probably a little bit more familiar with in a healthcare system. How many are in healthcare in particular? So like most of this, it's 90%. So anyways, this is a pilot that we've done with Cedars-Sinai. They're Los Angeles based, and they focus on biomedical research and medical education. And what they have is they have a pain list process and workflow where nurses go around to the rooms and they'll ask patients what's their pain level, and they keep track, on a chart. I'm not sure exactly how, if they did it all in paper or they had an iPad at some point, and they want to determine if this is out of whack, right? If you have, sometimes it's expected based on the surgery that they had or whatever conditions they're dealing with, their pain level. But then a spike in pain level is something that you're going to want to drill down in. And by keeping tabs of patients every day of their pain level, you can definitely catch some things early. So what they wanted to, that was a manual process, and they wanted to automate it. So they were going to put Alexas in each of the patient's rooms. And we'll talk about, and there's actually a session tomorrow at 4:30 that's going to go into this in detail, this particular application. So if you're interested in Alexa and using Alexa and voice information and voice applications in healthcare in particular, check that out. So here's the process flow, okay? And it starts off, of course, on the left-hand side. That is the device. It should look a little flatter. It's an echo dot. And it starts the process of asking the patient for their date of birth, their name, whatever identifying information, kind of like a password, because this is PHI that they're already dealing with. And Alexa is able to be certified for PHI data now. So even though it's a cloud service, you can make sure that it's secure with certain configuration. So once it has that information about the patient, it can go and retrieve things. And there it's going to go to an endpoint that's on their EHR. It could be an IRIS InterSystems database. There could be a lot of different systems here. Usually it's pretty crazy within healthcare systems of how many different types of silos you can get patients' information. But InterSystems does have some products there within HealthShare to make a unified care record, and so that could be very simple or it could be very complex. So once you get that extra data, any of that data that you might be useful for a machine learning model, because what the machine learning model is going to do in this case, and what this application is about, is predicting whether or not, figuring out whether or not this pain level that they're feeling right now needs to have some extra attention put to it. Like I said, it could be expected. It could be out of normal. You want to look at the data and be able to identify some problems very quickly. And then if there is some alert, you would be able to pass it out through whatever means, either an SMS or whatever information system you have. And then the last part of it, though, is that you want to get feedback from the nurses, from the clinical staff. Look over all of those alerts that were generated or not generated, and roll that data back in and improve your predictions. And all of that stuff there, when you're making that machine learning model, in this particular application, we're running, making a Jupyter notebook and developing the machine learning model there, and then feeding the model back into the whole system. So that's the kind of, those two applications point to, and all of this idea about how, the brain works, how intelligent systems need to coordinate and orchestrate. It really points to, kind of this unified platform that we have. With IRIS, you can basically eliminate a bunch of technical complexity. You have an interoperability engine that's enterprise-grade built in, very close to your data so that you can develop all of these applications very easily using the data that's operational, that's right in the flow of everything else. And basically, you have a choice, right? You can cobble things together, do it yourself with all the open source you want. There's a million different choices there, and you'll want to do that for some things. But at the same time, if you need to or want to get rid of some complexity, you can use that built-in interoperability engine for these things. And that becomes like the core kind of orchestrator and integrator across your whole application stack. So all those pieces, data management, your interoperability, your analytics, all together. So this goes into all of those things. Of course, you get developer productivity. You can, with the interoperability engine, you can see all of your messages, go through, trace them, find out all of the where the messages are going and what's going wrong with them. And we also have an experience lab, both today at 4:30 and Tuesday at 4:30. That's going to go into this whole thing in detail, kind of hands-on, and build one of these types of applications, calling out to intelligent services. So I wanted to, I'm kind of ending pretty quickly. I really blew right through this whole thing. But you can look at all of these. This points to a whole bunch of other kinds of AI and machine learning things that are going on this week. If you are interested, check them out. And I wanted to then have a lot of time for questions, and we can just kind of have a good conversation, actually.
You can back up a slide. So the high availability and disaster recovery are built into the platform?
Yeah. Yes, it's a configuration option. And in fact, we're going to be launching a way to launch high availability clusters of IRIS in the cloud from like a single click. So that's actually something that's built in. We have reference architecture, which is make those choices for you, and be mirrored, and very, very straightforward to set that up. So of people that have developed using any cognitive services, what were some of the pain points? Because part of what we're doing with our kind of AI strategy overall is we're thinking very much about making more connections, making more built-in connections to these services. I mean, it's easy enough to set up a REST endpoint and connect to that from IRIS and from the kind of the interoperability engine. But if it was even that one step easier, that would be useful to know, where we would have these built-in connections and just be able to feed your data to. So of those, types of things, we'd like to hear, what people want in this realm, what the challenges are. Are there any particular challenge? Anybody have a thing they'd like to share of what the particular challenges might be?
Oh, thanks. All right. So I just have two questions. One is, are there any examples that you can sort of show us here? So for those of us that haven't even jumped in at all, how do we get started? Where do we find the right material? I know there are labs, but we're here now.
Yeah.
And then do you have any examples you could show us? Maybe, how to get us started and what we're thinking
Yeah,
about?
so I guess I think I have some hidden slides. Let me just try to look through here of things that we did. So really, within those experience labs, or with the Alexa application, in general, you have to start from, what it is that you want to achieve, what services, what functionality, and then look in the marketplace and see what's available.
Your question, I think, is more specific to IRIS, how you get started within IRIS, right?
Yeah, I think we have a whole bunch of kind of quick starts overall within the learning services. So there's a lot of places to start from there that show specific examples in your kind of language of choice. But this just shows like kind of one aspect of like integrating the device and the Alexa kind of calls through here. Let's see. So actually, this is an email kind of gateway operation. So this is one way that you can see the data, I guess. It's not necessarily how you're building it. I'm trying to go through here. Of course, you can look at all this data that comes back from the patients and search through that. This isn't very exactly what you're asking. Sorry.
On the learning services, is there a sandbox environment?
Yes, there's sandbox environments for these kind of. I don't know if they've updated everything or where it is. Go to learning services and just play around, that's for sure.
So is the Alexa pain management application still in play? Is it still being used today?
Well, it was a pilot. It was a pilot, and I'm not sure what the current status is. All right, there. So let's see. So we have some learning labs that are about Java applications, all these different languages that you can do. I'm not sure what this particular application does, but this would be one place to start of actually making different applications right within the learning services. Of course, you've got your Fire sandbox. Don't think we have like an intelligent application sandbox yet. But we do have all these different kind of sandboxes to start from. Multi-model development. And interoperability would be the one to start from in this case. So kind of business process flow. Excuse me?
How about coding directly inside of Cache or Iris?
There are ones that's coming. I don't know if they're right here, but what the sandboxes do is they're loading up an IDE on the cloud connected to your Iris instance that's in the cloud. So it's just very seamless. The application's all loaded up, and then you can just edit the code right there in the browser. So it's actually pretty slick. I know that on Wednesday they're going to go into that, and there might be some other sessions that talk about that in detail. There's some new things that are coming out that probably haven't been released yet. Any other questions? Well, thanks very much.